This is the second of a series of 3 webinars by the Human Exposome Assessment Platform, or HEAP. And the webinars cover the responsible data practices in general, grounded in insights from the European Human Exposome Network Ethics and Law Working Group. In this webinar, Evert-Ben van Veen, a lawyer with over 30 years of experience in health and privacy law, will explore the legal and ethical dimensions of using commercial wearables, such as smartwatches, in observational research. Until this year, Evert-Ben was lead of the Ethics and Regulations work package of the HEAP project and chair of the European Human Exposome Network's Law and Ethics Working Group. At the moment, Evert-Ben is affiliated researcher at the Karolinska Institute for the HEAP project. He will outline the conditions under which wearable data can be responsibly integrated into research. Drawing on his extensive work at the intersection of law and science, including his contributions to shaping a research-sensitive interpretation of the GDPR, he will offer practical insights into reconciling innovation with compliance and public trust. Evert-Ben, the floor is yours, and we're very happy to have you. You're probably one of the few people that can talk with such authority to the subject, and we're very eager to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It makes me nearly shy. Let's hope that it works as planned. I will now share my screen and do it in the presentation mode. So you should be able to see this. If it isn't the case, please notify me.
It's absolutely perfect.
Okay, great. The webinar is composed of 4 parts. And already here I see the first typo, but never mind. The generic part and ELSI part, something about the EHDS, and then a general answering of the questions. The idea is that the panelists here will be able to see your questions in the not the chat, but the question and answer part of what Zoom offers, and that after each section we have a short pause where we can answer your questions. So I start with the motive of this webinar, and actually questions were posed to us in the Ethics and Law Working Group. In one of the EHEN projects, a Garmin smartwatch was proposed as an activity tracker for the participants in a prospective cohort study. And the DPO, so the data protection officer of that university, opposed, as the data were also to be used by the vendor. And so it was not an exclusive, as it usually is, an exclusive research environment where the data would be gathered and analyzed. Well, the question was posed to our working group, and we concluded that such use should be possible under certain conditions. And one of them is, of course, informed consent. But informed consent is always a necessary condition for this type of research with volunteers, but it's not always a sufficient condition. And the same here, and we'll discuss these other conditions in the last slide. So that is then the cliffhanger. The purpose of this webinar is to give you a tour d'horizon of commercial smart wearables in research in general. It cannot be seen in isolation, however. The background of these devices in healthcare in general must also be discussed, even briefly. We give a very broad overview of the literature in that respect. We focus, of course, on the ethical and legal aspects, and not on the technical, so as APIs to connect vendor data with this research database. I will also discuss shortly what might change under the EHDS, so the European Health Database, And then, as mentioned already, I've finalized with answering the original question and some further thoughts on these devices in exposome research. And to please our Finnish friends, this is the Onu ring. Originally we said from wrist to research, that is then the smart watches as this one, but you can also wear it on your finger nowadays. Limitations of the webinar are as follows. It's a very broad subject and we cannot cover everything, even if I would know everything, which is not the case. So this is also an invitation to further research on these devices in research. So further ELSI research on how they're used in research in health research. Daniel and I are working on a paper on that respect. So these are our preliminary results. And I have made a selection of the literature because there is a vast amount of literature about it, and that can be shared in the chat. So won't give the full quotations here in the slides. So the setup has been indicated already. Part one is the previous slides and its general overview of the devices in healthcare and research. Then we explore the ELSI issues. Then explore very briefly though, what might change under the EHDS, and then we answer the original question. So the general overview. These devices, so the commercial smart wearables, are part of the digitization in healthcare, particularly e-health and m-health. I've never really understood the difference, really, but never. E-health is seen, and you will all know that, as one of the solutions for the challenges of healthcare systems, especially Western healthcare systems. The trends in cost and demand for person power are unsustainable in the future. There's also a nice report by our general scientific board, which extrapolated and people working in healthcare now. And if nothing would change, half of the population would work in healthcare in the future, and the rest would receive healthcare. So that's unsustainable. So we must do something about it, and using e-health is one of the solutions. The other aspect is that these devices can do more and more and that is a publication by Kohler at ALIS, which is mentioned in the literature list. Monitoring health, nudging into health, and prediction of health outcomes. And these are the trends and capabilities of these. Oh, no, the thing is already here, sorry. So the Apple Watch, the Fitbit and the Garmin, you see here how they can do more and more. The Huawei, which is then in the front, is one of the new additions, and it is said to be even smarter than the other smartwatches. So, are they being used in research? Yes, the use is ubiquitous. And Garmin especially is very transparent about its role in such research. There is a special website, this one, which has a library of all the research uses using Garmin, and it has a nice search function where you can study, can search for what kind of study, what kind of focus group, the metrics, etc. So an example, I didn't find it with the other smartwatches, by the way. Now, from a legal point of view, the first question might be, are they medical devices? Well, almost always they are not. There seems to be that the FDA, so in the United States, has approved an Apple Watch for heart monitoring as a medical device, but it has not been the case in Europe. I don't think it matters very much. The question is whether they fit for purpose, and they usually are. And especially in an observational research setting, generic data are sufficient. But it should also be said that then after Kohler, the line between lifestyle accessories and essential health tools has become increasingly blurred. So the difference between an official medical device, according to the medical device regulation, and these health apps is becoming less and less important, actually. Now the question is, why don't you use bespoke research apps? And actually that was the case in the study which was the start of all these investigations. They had made an app, yeah, but it didn't work. These commercial apps or wearables, which are then also connected to an app, of course, they have the power of the commercial company behind them, and they are much better. There is a constant development and improvement also of the algorithms, their validity is, or the sensitivity and specificity is increasingly increased, and also the consistency. And I have a little example on my wrist. Originally, this also has a fall monitor, and originally this thing said that I was falling quite often while I wasn't. So it was not very specific. It was very sensitive, but not specific. It gave many false positives. But now it doesn't anymore. So there has been a software update, and it is getting better and better. And didn't really need it for a real fall, by the way. But this dependency on these smartphones and wearables in general comes with a price. As with any entanglement which is inherent in healthcare of publicly funded healthcare systems and private vendors. And we'll discuss that shortly in the ELSI part, which is now the end of part 1. And I don't know whether there are any questions.
Just to remind the audience that they can post their questions on the Q&A. Just a question for this part to get us all warmed up asking questions. Do you think that these commercial apps are going to continue to exist, or are we going through a period of hype and and they will start disappearing in a while? What do you think is the direction of travel we're going to?
No, I don't think that this is a hype. There's a study from a commercial marketing company which shows that it will only increase. The things are getting cheaper and cheaper, so there is an equity issue with using these things. I'll come back to that as well. But they're getting cheaper and better. So, and the market estimates is foreseen in the milliards.
Oh, wow. We don't have any questions, so we might as well. Sorry, there is a question. Were they validated against real medical devices?
There are some studies which do, but they're older. I've seen which did that validation. In that article of Kohler, they say, well, if you do that and you use a certain device, then by the time you publish it, the device has already been upgraded. The same as with my wrist thing. Also in that Garmin repository, you find studies which did, and then yeah, of course, what from what I saw, but I didn't read everything. By far, I must say, that they're very near and getting nearer and nearer to medical devices, which monitoring medical devices, because that is one thing. They do not interfere directly with your health. They show things, but they do not. They are not medical devices like defibrillators, etc., which are remote then, etc., and sort of start working. That is what they never do. So they're also low. But if you're interested, I think you should browse through the Garmin website, and you will find some studies which do these comparisons. But again, by the time it is published, the app has already been upgraded. Shall I go to the next slides? Which are then the ELSI aspects, and ELSI stands for Ethical, Legal, Social Impact. And our working group was about that, but we didn't discuss, and Daniel in a previous session discussed what we had been investigating in that ELSI working group. In particular, these are aspects which we actually didn't discuss in the working group, but when you go into these smart devices, you stumble over them. And one of them is the lifestyleization of healthcare. There's the health app discussion. There's a so-called sphere transgression. So academic research uses commercial entities directly and giving them a certain legitimacy. There is closely connected to this is public trust in these devices and what they measure. There is the aspect of equity in healthcare because not everybody can afford such a thing. And there are, of course, the data protection issues. Lifestyleization. Now, we all know that the onset of disease is in many cases also dependent on how we live, eat, drink, exercise, etc. And there is the nudge, certainly nowadays, to remain healthy. And the idea is that as healthy citizens, we are less expensive for the healthcare system. And sort of not only primary prevention, sort of pre-primary prevention, that you look at your own health starts here. And so we are becoming sort of bio-citizens, as it's been called in the literature. Now, the response to this sort of questioning of using these devices more and more. It is true, but it is an observation and not really an objection. And this lifestyleization is a trend which did not start at public healthcare, but in general in society. And even if we admit that many more factors which people cannot easily influence themselves, like where do you live, how do you live, so the whole social economic status discussion influencing health is also true, but as long as equitable healthcare remains available to all, we simply have to live in this environment where health takes sort of seen as a primary goal for many, and also by the healthcare system, by the way, or the public healthcare system. And I have a short little photo here of Joe Jackson, who already sang in 1982 was the song "Everything Gives You Cancer." What you drink, the booze, the nicotine, and etc., etc. The song went on. So this is not really arguments against using those things, I think. Then there's the health app discussion. And originally, health apps was a completely unregulated cowboy market, and I have a reference to that in the literature, with many in-app health apps, so they didn't do what they promised. But now there are much more tools to vet an app in general. There's even an ISO norm about health apps at the moment. And it must also be mentioned that these CSVs are connected to an app, but they are sold by vendors who are large and yeah, do a lot more than just inventing a little app because you're slightly yeah, internet savvy, because you have to also be very smart in engineering those machines, which carry a lot of very little, how would you call that, the measurement devices. So this thing notices that I fall, or thinks sometimes, thought sometimes that I fell, because it has a gyrometer in it. And apart from that, the response in general is that the discussion is not relevant for these apps which are connected to the smart wearables, because they're based on their algorithms, and the question has been asked how they really compare to medical devices, but the algorithms in general are reasonably valid, and they are validated in further research also organized by the vendors themselves. And there will be a new development under the EHDS, which I will not discuss in detail. The EHDS says that health apps can be connected to EHR, so electronic health records, and then they get a certain, for that they must get a certain approval. So the apps are, apart from the ISO norm, much more regulated. And in Germany, already data from the wearables can be added to the medical file. Now, the sphere transgression, this is after Walzer, a philosopher. The original Walzer said that the commercial for profit enters the public sphere. And now it is the other way around. So your non-commercial academic research uses commercial and hence legitimizes it. There's a response to that. In healthcare, entanglement between the commercial and the non-commercial is inherent. I mean, take only the drugs we use for healthcare. But also in health research, for example, the EHI projects, the Innovative Health Initiative, are an example of public-private partnerships in research. Then, of course, the question is how to manage conflict of interests and maintain the public, being that results of research started by public entities should not become proprietary data of the commercial entity. And it is also a question of public trust, which is then the next slide. And public trust is, there is a lot of research on public trust in data-intensive health research. And in general, the trend is that there is people want in general their data, their electronic health record data shared with for research, with some exceptions, but again, sharing with commercial entities, there is much more resistance. But this is also a question of public education, because when patients are more sort of educated, and you see that also with for example, cancer patients who answer differently, they are much more aware of those entanglements. But we should, of course, then maintain the public, and we must also ensure that, I mentioned that already in the previous slide, and there will be examples of that later. And shouldn't mention that here the health data collection starts with the commercial wearables. So it is not that EHR data go to these vendors. The vendors have these data already. And an interesting UK study, the British Heart Foundation, showed that people are in general very willing to use and share commercial wearable data for research. So first they must use them, of course, otherwise they can't be shared. And they want to use these data, or you want to use these variables, especially for the passive data, so meaning that they don't have to do anything because the thing measures you. When there is an app where you have to enter active data, then they become more resistant, or they like that less. Most resistance is about geolocation data, so the tracker which shows you where you are. I'll come back to that later as well. So in general, there is not a lot of public resistance against using these wearables. Then equity in healthcare, it is a fact that they are not cheap, and some have these things and many of them don't. And those who have them are in general younger, tech savvy, and perhaps also already health savvy. And there's a response to that as well. As predicted by Kohler, they will be used more and more in health care and linked with EHR data. And when that is necessary, then of course within an equitable EU healthcare system, that should be a healthcare system is not EU-wide, but it is member states, but each has that sort of at least idea of an equitable healthcare system, which means that so equity in access, then that system should provide for it, just as is the case with medical devices which are needed in healthcare. In research setting, it's a little bit different. Either the researcher should provide for the wearable or tap off of those who have certain wearables already. And then, of course, that will introduce a bias which must accommodate for. Now, data protection issues in general, and much of all the literature expresses worries in this respect. And strangely enough, these worries were repeated in that paper of Kohler, which is rather recent. And that literature, and certainly Kohler doesn't give clear answers, but they are there. And that is the response. The GDPR, of course, is applicable. And the GDPR is not only about consent, but it has much more data protection by design, etc., data security. And there is more which is often forgotten. Suppliers are, so the vendors of these machines are subject to the NIS directive, which is about sharing cybersecurity threats. And they, in my idea, are perhaps even categorized in the annex as very critical, or at least they are the manufacturers of critical devices. And there is also a regulation which is fairly recent of the EU about cybersecurity measures which must be taken by manufacturers which have a digital component, which these things obviously have. So I wouldn't say that, I'll come back to that later, that all privacy worries are over, but they certainly are managed much, much better than is suggested in most of the literature. Which was the end of part 2.
Evert-Ben, a question, because if you read the literature, they often mention education as a solution for a lot of these worries. However, education is much slower to respond than the technological advance. So is it really an effective solution to put forward, or is it something that is the basis, but actually needs to complement it with a lot of other things? What is your view?
Well, to be frank, I've read education, of course, or becoming more tech savvy, and in general, I think you should make a distinction between education in general about the Internet of Things, and in the Netherlands, it is even becoming that type of education part of the curriculum in the grammar schools. So that is education in general. Then health, then the second part is working with these devices when they are needed. And that is, I think, which can and should be educated, the people who need them, who want to use them on the spot, so to say. And if they are used in research, and that will then be in the later slides, when you offer those to your participants, you should also tell them how to use them and what not to do with them.
Thank you. There is a question regarding equity. Many low middle income countries cannot afford expensive CSWs. What
No.
about the cheap $10 devices?
I don't know. To be honest, I really don't know. The focus here, as was in the whole exposome project, at least what we did, was yes, Western European countries, and I didn't go into that. Yeah, it is a fair question, but we didn't do that. Yeah.
Perfect. I cannot see any other questions online, so I think we can proceed.
Okay. Then we go to the third part, which is the EHDS. Now, of course, and then the secondary use part of the EHDS, chapter 4 of the EHDS. And I guess that everybody here knows that EHDS for the European Health Data Space. And sometimes I will use the word or the abbreviation EHDSR, because that is the regulation which establishes that EHDS. And it will be a long time before it comes really into full effect, but the broad lines are clear, well, the first two dots are probably already known to everybody here, and also Daniel briefly mentioned it in the last time. There is the EHDS for secondary use, has sort of three entities, or fourth one actually, the SBE, health data holder, the HADAP, the Health Data Authority Board, and the data user, and Health Data Access Board, excuse me, and the data user. And so the data user can ask for the via the HADAP for data from the health data holder. And with the permit, the health data holder must submit health data to an SPE, so a secure processing environment, where the data user can then analyze this data. Except for those who have opted out of the EHDS system on secondary use, but also there is an exception in can be made an exception in national law for public health threats. And when you are a data user, you can only export the statistical output of your analysis. So you will never get access, or you never can download the real data on which you did your analysis. Now, what does it change for researchers using commercial smart wearables? Of course, it does not apply to the original collection of data in prospective cohort studies with volunteers. So if you equip them with these smart devices, then that is not secondary use, and you can add them to your study database. Yeah. once they are in the study database, of course, you are a health data holder, and people can ask for, other researchers can ask for a permit to analyze your, between quotation marks, data in the SPE. But that is not the question here. The question here is, could the researcher use health data from these wearable manufacturers via the EHDS? So actually sort of work around and not equipping them themselves with these wearables anymore. In general, I think that yes, secondary use under the EHDS applies to data from wellness applications, and that is very broadly defined under the EHDS, and also encompasses data in these from these smart wearables. So in general, the vendors must open up their data under the EHDS. And then there are restrictions for proprietary information, so their algorithms, when they are subject to intellectual property rights or are simply protected proprietary information, difficult word, then that must be protected, but in general you can use those data for research from the vendor. But the question is, can you use these data if they have variables about your participants? So can you do that in the SPE? And that, I think, doesn't work for two reasons. Because that would require a shared pseudonym of the study participants and the supplier, which I can't see how that can be managed. So only of your participants, and you can then match the data of your participants with the data which the participants has generated at the smartwatch, without you having set up that smartwatch and knowing that he even has a she has even a smartwatch. I don't see how that technically can be done, and it doesn't help you very much in your research either if it could be done, because you can only analyze those data then in the SPE, and what you actually want to do is continuously enrich your research database with the relevant smartwatch data or smart ring data, whatever it is, of your participants. So I don't think that the EHDS, except for the very generic, how many people are using smartwatches and how many steps they take in general, as a sort of yardstick for as a comparison to your participants. For this it might work, for this it won't work. So we're still stuck with equipping your participants with the smartwatch. This was the third part. Any questions here?
I cannot see any, but this is not surprising because the implementation of EHDS is still quite speculative, isn't it?
No, speculative. Yes, I mean, many details must be filled in. So, for example, the broad lines of an SPE, so the secure processing environment, those are clear, but what it actually should be able to offer is not clear. How the HEAP should function is not clear. There must be a sort of inventory, or also all over Europe, about what data sources are available, and they must give some indication about their quality. That has not been filled in yet. So many things are still to be filled in, but the broad lines are quite clear. And yes, that is what I try to say, that it won't solve, or it won't be an alternative for collecting data via these smart devices of your participants, because you need a direct connection with your participants for that, and the EHDS cannot offer that.
Yes. Thank you. I don't see any questions, so we may proceed and then take all the questions at the end.
Yeah. Great. So now finally, then the question, the answer to the original question. Now it starts with, and I mentioned that already in the ELSI discussion, there should the vendor and its app should be clearly GDPR compliant, and of course also compliant to the cybersecurity requirements, etc. Now, the objection might be that there can always be a shadow of doubt with commercial vendors. There are many procedures by data protection authorities against commercial vendors, that they haven't been vigilant enough, etc. So you never can be sure that is true, but you can be sure of any indication of the contrary. And so you must do a little research, you must read the privacy notices of these vendors, and when then there is an indication of the contrary, you can use that kind of wearable and its app. That, for example, is not really abstract, because that would leave the Fitbit out, because there are serious doubts about whether Fitbit is GDPR compliant. And you find it in the literature. It is the case was started by a privacy interest group, and when you read the privacy notice of Fitbit, you can easily understand why. But the others, we don't have any indication of the contrary. Now, the second step is then, so you have chosen a vendor, like in this case it was Garmin. The setup of that device must be provided by the team, either directly in direct contact or online. And in this case, for example, there was even a slight obfuscation of the participant's identity. You can give them a fake name, for example. And the date of these things are always asked for your date of birth, and you can sort of leave that in the middle. Not completely, because the algorithm uses one of these things which the algorithm uses is your date of birth, or at least your birth year. So there is a trade-off with the accuracy of the algorithm. But in a 4 years window, it still seemed to work. And of course, then the other condition is that only data relevant for the study will go to the research database. Then, of course, there is clear informed consent that you cannot control the whole data flow, because part of these data go to the vendor, which you have no doubt that it will be GDPR compliant. But once the participants have these things, they might want to do more with them, and they might want to unleash the full potential of the smartwatch for their own use. And then the informed consent should also mention that, okay, yeah, we cannot stop you with that, but that is then your own responsibility. The fact that they can do that is not a reason to stop using them. I think originally I got some comments about that, that would be sort of too paternalistic towards the participants, and well, paternalistic, you should say that, but you are being paternalistic if you say, well, we give them a smartwatch with limited settings, and they can change those settings, and then because they can change your settings, we're not giving them anymore. that is fully the responsibility of the participant, and they wouldn't be otherwise than the millions of people who are using these things already. So why not? And then I suggested that these smart devices also always work with the smartphone, and indeed there are many settings in that thing, and usually people click on yes because otherwise you're afraid that the whole thing stops. It is not the intention, but you can navigate these menus in a smarter way. And in my opinion, when you are doing this, you should also help your participants in setting the settings apart from already, which is in the second dot, and the third dot, full dot. If they have any questions about how do I do this and how can I set the settings in such a way that only data which I find helpful will be used, and for example, not to third parties, etc., you should help them. So this was basically our advice, and it helped to convince the DPO, so the Data Protection Officer of the university involved, to accept it. I have another slide which was not discussed in our working group, and I extend the case a little bit. In our case, this use case which we discussed earlier, it was only about activities, how much they move actually, and how fast, etc., and not where. And then you presume that they use the thing as intended, and not give it to their to a friend who moves much more. But that's inherent in all kinds of research, I guess. Now, in exposome research, the wear can be important, and in that sense, the GPS tracker helps quite a lot. But GPS data are sensitive, even, which should of course be the case if they're used under a pseudonym. And they are also considered extra sensitive. That was also the outcome of that British study which I mentioned earlier. Well, my idea about this, the where is only important because of what is there. So where are you? As a researcher, you shouldn't care, but if where you are is near a specific source, a busy street or a G4, G5 tower, then it becomes interesting. And those things there are maps where all this is already there. So whether the street is busy or not. And so these data should be, the GPS data should be mapped with the data on street maps or on other exposure maps, like heavy industry or whatever, and then the specific where becomes unimportant. So as soon as possible, you have only then distance to a source, and what kind of source, and not actually where the source is and where so the participant was. And how that should be done by people much smarter than me, but it can be done. I'm a citizen scientist in a study which studies EMF exposure, and that's actually what they do there. They have maps with these sources, and so they know where I am, but they don't know where I am. They only know in how near I am to such a source. And in the end, only the aggregated data count. And in my that citizen science thing is on my phone. And there I can see the aggregates of my exposure, which seems to be very low. And even on that app, I can't see where I have been, and neither do they know. So that would be my suggestion, that you can also, in spite of the sensitivities of GPS data, also use them in certain research when it is really necessary for exposome research, which is then where are you exposed to it after all, or certain exposures. That was nearly the end of my presentation. I have many acknowledgements. So the EHEN Exposome Network, which was the umbrella for our working group, the HEAP project, where, oh, sorry, go back. The HEAP project, where we got the subvention from, the Erasmus Medical Center I mentioned here because I have a guest account on their library, and though much of this, much of the publications are nowadays open source, not all. You can also enter the law library via that account, and much of what I presented wouldn't have been possible without it. And the Karolinska Institute, obviously, which gave me an affiliated researcher position for this year. And then, of course, I should also mention people, my former colleagues at the EHEN working group, working party on ethics and law, and many others like Heather, who really insisted on doing these kinds of webinars. Yeah, without her, I guess we wouldn't be here. And of course, my partner, Daniel Gross, my previous colleague, and yeah, thank him for the many discussions we had.
Thank you very much, Evert-Ben.
Yeah.
We have two final questions. The first one is, how do you see these devices working with insurance companies?
I don't.
That's a clear question.
That is very yeah. Then of course, what insurance companies? But let's say health insurance companies.
Yes.
And with that, I'm very strict. I mentioned already equal access to healthcare, and though I do think that health insurance also in the Netherlands would do much more on prevention. It is often difficult to get money for prevention activities under our Dutch healthcare system, but an idea that, for example, if you show that you are active, you get a discount on your insurance premium is yeah, anathema for me. I don't want that. And I don't see any, you sometimes see that suggested, but thus far it has been rejected in all the countries which I know. So it is unethical. Other insurers, yeah, that will depend. If a car insurer gives you a premium for safe driving, for example, and there would be something in your car which shows that you haven't exceeded the speed limit or whatever. It is obtrusive, but yeah, and questionable, but yeah, I have a more neutral stance on that.
And the second question is, will the EU require CSWs to be GDPR compliant by law?
So what should be digital? What should be compliant?
The wearables, if they will be forced to be GDPR compliant by law.
Well, there are by law already should be compliant with the GDPR. They should be compliant with the new regulation, which is came last year, and has still a period to be before it fully is in effect, about manufacturers' cybersecurity with a digital component. They should be compliant with that NIS directive, which is about common response to cybersecurity threats. Then would it be what more compliance can you then think of? Should they become compliant with the medical device regulation? That they avoid that because that is a lengthy process. And like mentioned already, the line between a real medical device which measures something and a smartphone which measures something as well, that line has become blurred. And as long as they fit for purpose, in the specific context where you want to use them, and you have sufficient evidence that they are fit for purpose, I don't see any reasons for further compliance.
Thank you. If Daniel is online, I would like to ask him for a comment at the end of this webinar. And then we'll come back to you, Evert-Ben, for final thoughts and close the webinar. Daniel, over to you.
Yes, I don't really have any further comments, but I do want to mention, as Evert-Ben also already said, that we are working on a publication that will delve more deeper into all of these topics that were discussed today.
Perfect. And Evert-Ben, final thoughts?
No, I would like to thank the attendants for hearing me and their questions. I would like to thank you for organizing this. Now we must wait for the publication. Now we must not wait, we must work on it, and you have to wait.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And just to remind everybody, the third webinar in the series will be after the summer, and it will be announced in good time. So thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Evert-Ben, and have a good weekend all.
Thank you.